How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sidelined. I'm Brooke Fletcher. That's my girl, Dani K, coming to us from Toronto, covering some tennis. Dani, how are you?
Doing well. Yes, we're here. The men are in Toronto. The women are in Montreal. We're covering both, but you can see the lovely practice courts behind me. So it's a fun city. I'm excited to explore some restaurants. Brooke, you're in Chicago and wearing a very cute dress. I really like that one.
Well, word on the street is that you also got this dress too. Great minds think alike. Great minds think alike. Well, we're not going to waste any more time. We are very busy, and their next guest is also a busy girl, 𝗵cie Costabile. She covers women's sports for Front Office Sports. She was in Chicago, now in New York. So let's welcome in 𝗵cie.
Well, 𝗵cie, it's really good to see you. We wish we could hang out with you in person like we typically did in Chicago, but it's nice to get to chat with you no matter where you are. But tell us where you're coming to us from.
Yeah, just three Chicago girls hanging out in three different locations. I'm in New York. Our office, I'm now with Front Office Sports, as you guys know, and our office is in Manhattan. I'm living in Brooklyn, and it's just been an unreal transition from Chicago to New York. Fantastic, in the best way, unreal.
Do you feel like a local yet?
Honestly, I know it takes at least like 10 years to earn that badge of honor, so far from it, but I have been trolling people and I'm like, oh, I'm from New York now. Like I was just with Sarah Spain in Portland, and all weekend I just kept going, oh, I'm from New York now. I don't understand. I'm from New York. So definitely like not a local. I would never, claim that, but I do feel very at home here, I'll say.
Well, we're going to definitely talk to you about your transition to New York and all of that. But you just mentioned Portland, so let's get there. What were you doing there? What brought you there? And how was it?
Yeah, I was there to moderate one of the panels during a weekend that was put on by the ownership group of the owners, of the Portland Thorns and the Portland Fire, which is the NWSL and WNBA team there. And it was the epicenter. It was called the Women's Global Sports Summit. And so the intention was really to emphasize what's happening in Portland in terms of these two franchises, exemplifying that Portland can be an epicenter for women's sports fans. And the one thing I will say is that doesn't happen overnight, right? Just because you say it doesn't make it true. But I will say that the fan base there, whether it is the Thorns or what's being redeveloped with the Fire, because we know the Fire previously existed in Portland for 3 seasons, that fan base, those fans there have the potential to truly make Portland a space that is, second to none when it comes to women's sports. So time will tell if the epicenter is accurate when describing Portland, as the home of women's sports. But if it does happen, it will be because of the fan bases that exist there.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because let me tell you, little girl Dani wanted to play for the Portland Fire. And I remember when we first got satellite TV, the WNBA pass came with the coverage. So you didn't have to pay anything extra to get all of that. And I used to sit there with literally Excel, and I would write down everybody's name. I knew all of their stats. I knew where they went to school, what type of lipstick they wore, because they were really good at the time of really giving the insight of every single player on that team. Not to mention, I literally idolized Jackie Stiles my whole entire life. Demai Walker always was like into shopping and all that stuff. So it's funny that stuff stays with you. I'm 34 now, and I was definitely not 34 at the time. And I can still remember intimate details about every single one of those players, because you're right. The fan base is there in Portland for this. I can't believe it took this long for Portland to get them back. When you're talking about these new cities, I use air quotes because obviously Portland's had a team before. These new cities that are getting these WNBA leagues, or is there one that someone's more excited about than the other? Or is the league just excited in general to be adding more teams?
I think that's a great question. And the league collectively is just excited to be adding more teams. But when it comes to the fan reaction, I personally have loved to see the fan reaction to the Detroit team, or excuse me, Detroit getting granted an expansion team. I almost called them the Detroit Shock because I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to name this team? How could they not bring back the Shock name? But time will tell. We'll see if they do, in fact, mirror what the Portland Fire have done in terms of bringing back the original name. But again, I think the fan bases in each location, especially when it is a franchises that already existed there, they're just so beyond excited to be welcoming back these teams. What I also can say is that when it comes to future expansion teams, the Houston Comets, baby. I mean,
Bring 'em
everyone
back.
is just right. Everyone's just waiting on pins and needles for when Houston's either granted an expansion team or potentially could look to buy a team that's currently for sale or is pursuing a sale. So there's definitely a lot of excitement about the potential for a team to return to Houston.
Do they have a timeline on just how fast this expansion can go? I mean, we know they added 3 teams, but you mentioned the Houston. Do they have a timeline?
So right now we know there's going to be a record 18 teams by 2030. And the problem with the WNBA is if you can't expand, I mean, any league, right? You can't expand too fast. But the issue at hand for the WNBA is they're already dealing with these limited rosters. Roster expansion is something that players are really actively pursuing, and I mean, coaches have spoken up about this too, just because of injury and other needs, for the roster size to expand. But when it comes to expansion, when you consider roster expansion, the reason that roster expansion directly impacts team expansion is because of the talent pool, right? And the number of players that are prepared and ready to lead a franchise. So as far as timeline for a team to potentially land in Houston, we don't have a timeline at this point. We just know that Kathy has spoken highly about, the possibility of a team returning to Houston. She called out Houston specifically in the recent press conference regarding the 3 expansion teams, Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia, and said, Houston's next. So take that for what you will. But we do know 18 teams by 2030. Anything beyond that is still, unknown at this point.
Well, I think a lot of fans should be excited about, and players should be excited to go back to Detroit. And as somebody that lived in Detroit for over 3 years, I understand how great of a sports town it is. And so I was I'm 𝗁cie 𝗰𝗶𝗹, her comments, of course, they got a big reaction, but I'm like, come on, this is a sports town that, will welcome you guys with open arms.
Yeah, I mean, I think 𝗁cie 𝗁𝗁𝗃, if her comments were a bit off base, especially if you know the history of the league. And obviously, again, I mean, I'm a Midwestern girl. I know us 3 have roots in the Midwest. I mean, 𝗁cie does too. So even it coming from her, it was like, wait, you're from, Missouri, I believe, and she plays in Indiana. But either way, I mean, Detroit, again, to your point, the history of the WNBA in that city is deep. They were one of the most successful franchises, not just in terms of winning, but also in terms of attendance. And so when you consider those 2 points, I think the Detroit team has the potential to come in right away and again return to kind of that same standard if things are done the right way, and if they, again, I'm a proponent of leaning on the history and honoring the history, so I think they have a huge opportunity here to do that.
This feels like a silly question because obviously more teams means more players can play in the WNBA, which means huge opportunities for college players, for overseas players to get an opportunity to play professional basketball in America. But how exactly does the league go about spreading out the superstars?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and honestly, a big talking point, especially amongst players. I can remember, just a few years ago talking about expansion with Candace Parker, and that's something she mentioned. The league right now, at that point, it was, I believe, 2021 when we had this conversation, maybe 2022. I think it was 2022 when they tried to run it back. And she was talking about how important it is for each franchise, each expansion franchise, to be rooted with a a star player, because that helps the fan base grow. It draws attention to the team. And obviously we saw that. I mean, even with her career, she joined the LA Sparks, and it was on the heels of Lisa Leslie really pioneering the WNBA, but the WNBA specifically in LA. So the star power is really important. But to that point, what we're seeing now with the attention that's growing in the WNBA is the stars. Each star is growing, right? The shine from their star power is growing. So of course we've got the Caitlin Clarks, the Angel Reeses, the Paige Beckers, 𝗗liche 𝗵𝗶𝗹, Alyssa Thomas, 𝗵ecie 𝗰𝗶𝗹. Like you could go down the list of players that have pioneered this league and have put it in a phenomenal position in terms of more recent stars. But they are helping shine a light on other players that are then becoming these household names that I think is going to benefit these expansion franchises.
Well, there's a lot of discussion going on, and during the All-Star weekend, we saw the shirts, "Pay us what you owe us," because we know the CBA, it expires at the end of the 2025 season. So can you give us more background on, what sparked the shirts, and then just kind of the discussions that are happening as you lead into CBA talks?
Yeah, so as we know, the players are pursuing a new CBA. They opted out of their current CBA last year, and they have until October 31st to ratify a new CBA. And if they don't, which again, I think it's important to reference what happened in 2020. So in 2019, they had, a similar deadline. It was an October deadline, and they expanded that deadline by 60 days. So they had until the end of the 2019 calendar year to reach an agreement with the WNBA for a new CBA. We could very likely see that happen again, just based on, what we've learned about where CBA negotiations stand now. And what we know is that they haven't been the most successful, right? The two sides are still trying to get on the same page. And 𝗵ecie 𝗰𝗶𝗹, the president of the WNBPA, spoke about the importance of the in-person meeting that happened in Indianapolis ahead of that meeting. And she referenced previous negotiations when she said that, this in-person meeting that often happens during All-Star weekend is extremely valuable, because this is really when in the past negotiations have been able to maybe course correct or get on a stronger page, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily the case this year. Players did say, verbatim, one specifically said to me, the meeting was bull. Other players have said, it was a waste of time. There were a number of quotes coming out of that meeting that alluded to the fact that it did not go great. Again, these are negotiations. We know things take time. And when you're talking about something like salaries, and not just salaries, but a need to increase them substantially, I think there's going to be a lot of conversations that still need to be had for these two sides to come together.
Obviously, I want to dive a little bit more into those conversations, but I think before we can, there's just so many letters being thrown around. So can you just, for lack of better terms, dumb it down? What CBA stand for? You said WNBPA, which I'm assuming is a players association. Why don't you break down the different parties so that when we do dive into this a little bit more, it doesn't get too in the weeds for people that maybe are just learning a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I absolutely love your guys' podcast too, by the way, and like the need to dumb things down, because to be honest, like these conversations are a lot. And for average fans, like you start to hear these terms and you're like, what the hell is everybody talking about? So anyways, the CBA stands for Collective Bargaining Agreement. And anybody that's in a union understands that the two parties reach an agreement on everything from, operational standards to pay. So for example, because again, I know we have a big Chicago audience based on where we all have worked. I was part of a union in Chicago, and one thing that we negotiated for were pay increases each year. And that was something that we had to go back and forth on in order to get the pay increases that we wanted to see each year. And it increased by a percentage each year. But again, you're negotiating back and forth with the union, which represented, you know, the journalists, and then the company and their lawyers, which again is looking out for the best interest of the company. Anyways, when it comes to the WNBPA, that stands for Women's National Basketball Players Association. So that's the union, that's the players, and 𝗻𝗁𝗃 is the president. So she essentially serves as the rep, the overarching rep of her players or of the league. And from there, you know, you have a vice president, two vice presidents, Breanna Stewart and 𝗵𝗍cie H𝗁𝗄𝗯, and then a number of other players who help serve the union. And so those are some of the breakdowns. I don't know if that touched everything or if you have another question about like.
No, that's very helpful, because that's going to help me lead to my next question, which is just describing the overall controversy of it all. Because there's one hand that says, well, the WNBA is $40 million in debt. Then there's the other hand that's saying the WNBA viewership is growing at such a rapid rate. Where I do believe both things can be true, there's an argument there that does support the players as well. So can you just kind of dissect that argument?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because one, the WNBA has the transparency issue. I mean, you look at something as simple as officiating and the fines that get tossed out in the league and how little is explained afterwards. I mean, if you apply that now to a larger scale in terms of the finances, it gives you a glimpse of, again, how little this stuff is actually you know, discussed and shared in a productive and clear way, right? So considering that, it is often challenging to accurately discuss the financials of the WNBA because things are made so difficult. There's a huge transparency issue. That being said, the players, you know, I'm going to use, you know, what 𝗻𝗁𝗃 has said in the past. She's been told by Commissioner 𝗵𝗃 that the players don't understand the business. And that is, you know, they've said that's not only wrong, but it's completely inaccurate. Like we understand the business, and what we're negotiating for is where the league is headed, right? So when you take the current financial state of the WNBA, well, the players are considering where it's headed based on the investment from expansion fees. So, or the influx of revenue from expansion, or excuse me, not revenue, but the influx of cash flow from expansion fees, which we just saw these three new teams paid a record $250 million in expansion fees each. Okay. And then you consider the new media rights deal, which is over $1 billion, $2.2 billion over an 11-year period. That doesn't come into play until next year. So the union, it's only intelligent for them to negotiate for future expectations of where the league is, not where it's currently at. You know, they're trying to make up ground, not you know, be behind the 8 ball again. Because again, if you consider the previous CBA, collective bargaining agreement, they were negotiating from a place of the league being in an even more unstable position. Yeah. So while, you know, there are numbers out there and reports out there that say the league isn't currently profitable, it's the union's job to consider where it's going.
Yeah.
And it's the league's job to also consider where we're going and how we can continue on this upward trajectory while also meeting as the expectations of the players too. Like the W does have to think, you know, about responsibility in this as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a very nuanced conversation. There's a lot to be said about it, but yes, the union has to consider where it's going, not where it's been.
I'm glad you cleared that up because again, the argument I think is everybody's looking at the now and not the trajectory. And Annie, can you clarify like how often CBA discussions come up and how, I mean, it's not an every year thing. This is something.
No, so the previous CBA, which was ratified or agreed to, ratified is just a fancy word for saying signed and agreed to, in 2020, that was supposed to run through 2027. So each collective bargaining agreement, it doesn't matter what league you're talking about, there is a stipulation in each where the players can opt out early, or there typically is. I guess I shouldn't say always is because I don't cover, like
Other sports.
every league,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm just in women's sports, so there's typically a stipulation in each that allows for the union to opt out if they want to pursue, again, like we're seeing in the WNBA, better standards across the board. So that's what happened, and is why the CBA ran for only the current CBA. Ran for only 5 years or 5 seasons versus what was expected to be through 2027.
I'm interested because, we're talking about, immersed in the baseball world right now, and theirs is up, the end of next season. And so there's a lot of talks and about leverage and who has more leverage in your opinion when it comes to the W. Who do you think, the players or owners in the league have more leverage when it comes to this type of negotiation?
I think the players are winning in the court of public opinion because the league has not done a good job of transparently communicating its financial circumstances. Now, again, even if they were to, this is my opinion, even if the league was to come out and explain, clearly black and white, the financial situation of the league, I think it's still, the public opinion would still be on the side of the players who are advocating for better pay, because that's something we can all relate to, especially as women. The inequities in terms of salaries in our country, and again, for women, and specifically when you break it down even further, not just women but black women, it's the discrepancy is even worse. And so I think that's something that, again, just on a human basis, you relate more strongly to the side that, again, is just advocating for a basic human right, which is to be paid fairly.
So interesting. I mean, honestly, I'm so glad you cleared that up, because I was curious too, like what they're arguing for, if it is indeed the $40 million loss at the moment that they're at, for sure. It was a little head scratching to understand what the argument was, but now that you're saying it's where the WNBA could be in a couple years, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah,
and has actually cleared that up, because that was the confusing part.
And that's the thing, just another thing to note, I haven't had a player specifically state out, right, that, we're negotiating for where the league is going. But what they have said is we're negotiating, we don't want a fixed rate, like a fixed increase, right? Yeah. Okay, so if we're talking, again, just going back to the Sun Times, each year, over a short window, our salaries increased each year, but it wasn't a fixed rate. It went up each year. And so for the W, they don't want to commit to, let's just say hypothetically, where it's at now. Like right now, they're at a fixed rate of a 3% increase each year. Well, they don't want to commit to a fixed rate, because if the league continues on this trajectory, right. So it's more so the emphasis is on, we don't want a fixed rate when it comes to our salaries and the increase that we're seeing.
This has been a great breakdown, and I truly appreciate your knowledge on this, because I think it's going to help a lot of people just try to wrap their brains around it, because obviously it was such a huge story to see all these players come out in the Pay Us What You Owe Us t-shirts, and to know the behind the scenes about it a bit more, I think is going to be extremely helpful. Now, obviously, one of the reasons that this league catapulted into the spotlight, for better, for worse, argue if you want, be a fan of her if you want to or don't want to, I don't care. But Caitlin Clark has been the story for years now in college, and then leading into the WNBA, it's continued to carry on there. But she was in headlines recently beyond what she's been producing on the court. She's had a stalker situation. What went on with that? And just recently, why was it in the news?
Yeah, so this man who was stalking her and sending her explicit messages on social media, really it was alarming. If you go back and look into the rate at which he was not only messaging her, but then the proximity he was to her. I believe he was within a few hundred yards of her at one point, and in Indiana. And so it's back in the news because he was just sentenced to 2 years is it in prison or yeah, he was just charged and sentenced to 2 years. And so I think it's important to set this precedent again, especially when we're talking about women's sports, because historically, I mean, this league has done a better job in recent years, and they've been forced to, right? Following Brittany Griner's return to the WNBA and the harassment that she received upon, her return to the WNBA, it really was alarming that the league didn't previously had proper security in place. And when I say proper, a lot of teams were not traveling with security in previous years. And so anyways, all of this to say that the recent news of this stalker, who again was not only sending alarming messages to Caitlin, but got into very close proximity with her, has been charged. I think it's an important precedent to be set in terms of the protection of players and these situations being taken very seriously when it comes to online threats that can then turn into a direct threat in terms of someone having access to you.
No, and I'm glad that they took action because, talking about growing the game, and to your point, Annie, where, I mean, I think I read articles where, they would have to fly, publicly, and they would get harassed at the airport, and then the Brittany Griner situation. It's like, if you're trying to grow the league, then you got to protect your players, especially Caitlin Clark. And so, no, I'm glad that they took action. And I'm also glad that they took online threats seriously, because you don't even have to be in the W. I think anybody in the public light, gets harassed way too often.
Oh my God, it's
Yes.
crazy.
And I'm glad. Yes. And it's so scary because you're not sure if they're actually going to act on it or not. And sometimes it's too late. And so I'm glad that they finally took it seriously.
Obviously, I'm here in Toronto, which is a men's tournament, but we're still covering the women's tournament over in Montreal, which just makes me think about the incidences that has happened in women's tennis with that. 𝗵nica 𝗨𝗪ce was stabbed on court in 1993. You've got 𝗵arata that's recently had some stalker issues, and it doesn't go away. It's been happening for forever. But the leagues and the organizations and the associations have come out and helped and backed it up. And so it was nice to see law enforcement do the same.
And the thing that we have to talk about too in all of this is, because I've seen a lot of commentary on, what about how the NBA players get harassed and da da da. And it's like, there's a significant difference, and that being the stature of players in the NBA versus the WNBA. And I'm talking about physical stature, right? If you're just an average person who is, harassing online, well, there's a deterrent to harassing in person when you're dealing with someone of a physical stature like these players in the NBA versus the WNBA. If there's not other deterrents as far as security, etc., like, there are people who might feel emboldened to take something from online to something in person because, again, they're maybe not threatened by the physical presence of a WNBA player the same way they are maybe a player in a different league. And that's something really that the teams need to prioritize and understand, and they have to a point. Like, I cover this league every day, and these teams, people should know, are stacked with security. Every player is with security at all times. You do not have access to them unless, team employees security is around. So people need to understand that the WNBA is taking this very seriously, and these players are protected as they should be.
Great stuff. I mean, super interesting. And I think anytime player safety is at the top of a priority list, that's a good thing. So
Yeah.
let's talk about one of these players that's another one of these superstars of the league, and switch to more of a positive note, because we've certainly stuck on, I don't know if it's negative, but let's
Very
look at the
informative,
positives,
Real.
shall
Yeah,
we?
informative and real.
Let's talk about Cameron Brink, because she is making her return tonight as we film this. So as this gets out, she will have already played. So we aren't going to speak to her performance, but bigger picture wise, what does this do for her team, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, we just saw from the LA Sparks, they just went on a little win streak of their own, capping it off with a win against the New York Liberty. And the one thing about the Sparks that has been impressive, all season is their offense, right? And so when you consider where they've struggled, which again is on the defensive end, they're in the bottom three in terms of defensive rating in the WNBA, and what Cam brings back to that team. I mean, this could be a huge key to them accomplishing what they set out to this season, which was to make the playoffs. So I think this team has struggled defensively with injuries, specifically to Cam Brink. So her being back, it just adds another threat down low. I mean, in her rookie season, from what we saw during her limited time in her rookie season, she immediately, everything we saw from her at Stanford was transferring or translating to the WNBA in terms of her shot blocking and her rim protection. And so that's something that the LA Sparks have greatly missed and will benefit them, especially as we've seen their offense kind of carry things during this first half of the season.
She's so fun to watch. I'm obviously a Pacific Northwesterner, so I'm clearly biased on anybody that grew up in that area. But since you know the league so well, and you obviously know all these players inside and out, you're not going to want to do this, because I think picking your favorites when you're a sports journalist is really difficult. So just maybe give our listeners a few of those maybe not talked about names quite as much, and maybe a personal anecdote on why they're cool, why people should be fans of them, what makes them exciting.
Oh my God. I actually love this question, and I could take an hour to go through this entire league and give you reasons about every player. But to be concise, or just to, fit within our little time schedule here, top of the top is Alyssa Thomas. I mean, when I first started covering this league, I remember watching her play. She was with the Connecticut Sun at the time. She's now with the Phoenix Mercury. And I couldn't even put into words, but just watching her play and her competitiveness on the court, I was like, oh my God, this girl is so cool. If you're a competitor, which I know we all are, when you're watching a player like Alyssa Thomas, who not only is one of the best to ever play in the WNBA point blank period, the way she carries herself and the way she talks on the court and the way she competes, it is just something that I think really can get just the average fan intrigued, on the edge of their seat, etc. So Alyssa Thomas, and the other thing is too, she doesn't get enough credit because she is someone that kind of lays back. She's not really boisterous in front of the media. She just lets her game talk. And unfortunately, because we have so few kind of covering this league, I think it's fallen by the wayside. But either way, she is top of the top, someone that will always be on number one on my list in terms of her cool factor. Another player that I've got to give their flowers to is Courtney Williams. Obviously she's garnered a ton of attention because of her and 𝗵𝗍cie 𝗵𝗶𝗹's recent Stud Buds broadcast live stream. But the thing I think everybody should know about Courtney is she's as real as they come. She will look you in your face and say whatever she feels, needs to, etc. And I always respect that about another human being. It doesn't matter, player, person, whoever. I think somebody that could look you in your eye and tell you what's up is good in my book. And she's always been that way. And she's just authentically herself. And then last one, I think I got to go with, oh my God, this is so hard. I'll go with 𝗻𝗶𝘶𝗶𝗹 because I'm in New York now, and she's here in New York, and the way that she got to New York is such a unique story. The New York Liberty's general manager, Jonathan Kolb, does a fantastic job. But essentially, Leonie was with the Sparks and the Sky, and then New York, and her trajectory in the WNBA really speaks to some of the challenges that exist in the WNBA, and so. Anyways, her rise in this league and her landing in New York, I think, is really unique. And her just being an international star and bringing that star power to the WNBA, I think, is one of the reasons I'm such a fan of hers.
I love this because we're always looking, of course, as we're talking about growing the game, we need more stars to be fangirls of. So this is awesome that you were giving us. I know that was really hard for you, but
I could have kept going.
Girls a follow and show our support. But Annie, you mentioned that you are in New York now. You're an NYC girl. So we're gonna play a little game real quick before we let you go, comparing Chicago to New York. Are you ready?
Oh my God. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Better food, New York or Chicago?
New York. I'm so sorry, Chicago. I truly am. But I mean, it's not a competition. New York.
Okay. With that, Chicago style pizza or New York style pizza?
You guys, New York. It's so easy to grab a slice on the go and like keep it moving. It's also just like there's spots everywhere that are so fantastic. I think that's part of the reason why New York does beat Chicago out in a lot of ways is like Chicago has the things, but they don't have as many of the things as New York does. You know what I'm saying? So it's just easier access.
What about public transportation wise?
Yeah.
New York. I mean, listen, like I had a car in Chicago, and like in your car, you got your music on it. You love it, right? I loved having a car in New York or in Chicago, but New York, there's no need for a car, not only because the traffic is just insane, but because the train gets you anywhere and everywhere, so easily. So public transportation is so simple here. It gets a little sketchy when it rains though, dude. I'm still trying to figure that out. Like the subway,
I saw the flooding video.
Yeah, you gotta keep your head on a swivel. Okay, only because I know you are the best vintage shopper there is. The vintage shopping, New York or Chicago?
You guys, I feel like I've turned my back on Chicago because I'm about to answer New York again. But like, come on, it's New York again. Let me tell you a story, okay? I woke up one Sunday, I was having a trash morning, and I forced myself to go to the gym, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna walk to the gym just to get some fresh air, some sunlight. And I'm walking down a random street, and there's this little vintage pop-up. What do I find there? Vintage Dior and vintage Valentino for like under $200. Okay, it's like that doesn't happen in New York. Like, and it's not like these were crazy pieces. It was like a slip dress and a skirt. So under 200 made sense. But yeah, it just, again, it's the access. Like you never know what street you're going to be walking on and what you find. And that's what makes it so fantastic here. But I do have to shout out Knee Deep on 18th Street in Chicago. That is the best vintage store, in my opinion, in Chicago. They have fantastic things. It's so big. And so take your time going through everything, but a fantastic vintage store.
I'm taking note.
Chicago.
You're living my 𝗵𝗫 𝗏𝗏 dream in New York, Annie, with all the great shopping.
I aspire to be the sports version of 𝗵𝗫 𝗏𝗏. So thank you for that compliment.
Annie, we appreciate you taking the time, giving us all the details from the W and also some fashion tips. You're the best. We miss you here in Chicago, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, I miss you guys too. Thank you so much for having me.